pioneering days of the white settlers. For many years, explorers had tried and failed to conquer the seemingly impassable cliff escarpments and deep valleys at the base of the Blue Mountains to learn what lay beyond. The weather was often inclement, the terrain and geography was relentless, and the horses often had to be turned around for water. It was 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. At the foot of the Blue Mountains sits the township of Blaxland, named in honour of the man who, in 1813, finally led a party on a journey of discovery, finding a pathway which eventually proved to be the gateway to the top of the Blue Mountains. The same track we still use to this day. His name was Gregory Blaxland. Along with his 2 close friends, William Lawson and William Wentworth, endured a tedious and challenging 50-mile expedition over 21 days. During their campaign, they'd cut a trail in a different direction than those before, finally finding a way around the cliff escarpments and revealing a passage to the top of this formidable mountain range. With a way to the west now finally possible, they returned to Sydney with the news and set plans to complete the crossing. Since those times, Yowie sightings across the Blue Mountains have been consistent, including the townships of Wentworth, Lawson and Blaxland. While we're in the district and topic of Blaxland, it's time to hand it over to Sarah Bignell in the very next town. As I say, we've been here before and here we are again. Welcome back to Glenbrook.
When I saw this creature face to face, I pretty much blocked it out of my mind. And I wasn't going to bother with it anymore. But thanks to YouTube and all the Yowie stuff, it's actually opened my mind up and it's made me want to tell my story.
Tell me in as much detail as you can, and then I'll ask you some questions afterwards.
So back in 1991, I was living down in Sydney. I was working with a Yugoslav fella putting fences up. He was a bit of a rabbit hunter. He liked going out rabbiting. He kept on pestering me to go with him. And eventually I said, yeah, okay. One weekend we went out and we caught a bunch of rabbits. And then the next weekend he said, oh, come out with me again. So he picked me up and we went out past Emu Plains. There's a lot of rural country areas out there. So we went out that way. We got there to this particular property. We pulled up and Greg got out, walked over to the owner's house. And the guy came out onto his veranda and Greg told him what he wanted to do, go rabbiting. And this guy was like, yeah, okay. He said, good luck. He said, my property's, blah, blah, blah. There's the boundaries. So we jumped in the car and we drove about halfway down into his property. Then we got out and started walking. Now, the description of his property is like this. His land was completely cleared. There was only a few trees on his property, okay? The grass on his property was probably 2 inches high at the best. The next door's property and the property at the back of him was exactly the same, but everything was cleared. So there was hardly any trees around. We started walking down. We were coming towards the end of his property. And at the end of his property, it sort of went up into a ridge. At the top of the ridge was 2 huge thorn bushes, maybe 3.5 meters apart from each other. And behind the thorn bushes was the end of his boundary. We're walking along. We're looking at the ground for rabbit holes. I'm looking up at this thorn bush on the left. All of a sudden, the thorn bush sort of rattled, shook. And I'm staring at it. I'm thinking, what the hell? My head's pointing to the ground, but my eyes are fixed on this thorn bush. All of a sudden, out of the blue, jumps this creature. It was kind of like, had a squarish kind of body. It had the cone-shaped head, but the head was sort of like buried into the shoulders a bit. It had short, really thick, stocky legs. And its arms were probably about the length of a human's type arms. And this thing dived from the left thorn bush to the right thorn bush in one leap. Now, that's 3.5 meters. It leapt in one leap. Now, we had a Doberman with us, right? This Doberman wasn't very bright. And no sooner had we said we were going to turn around and go back to the car, a rabbit shot out in front of us, of all things. And this rabbit ran straight up the ridge towards the thorn bush on the right. So we've panicked and we're chasing after the dog because the dog just took off after the rabbit. We're screaming out to the dog to stop. Anyway, as we're running up, I could see there's a tiny little hole in the bush at the bottom. The rabbit ran into that. The dog was hot on his trail, right? As the rabbit's run into the hole, the dog has done a big dive, dived straight into the bush, head first, and got stuck. We've run up, and all you could see was the dog's back legs sticking out of the bush. Greg's grabbed his dog, and he's trying to pull it out. I've run around the back of the bush, and there was nothing there. Absolutely nothing. And I looked around, like I gave a quick sweep of the area, couldn't see anything running away. At this stage, Greg's yelled out to me, "Give me a hand to pull the dog out. I can't get him out." I've walked around there, and Greg's trying to pull the dog out. As he did, the dog got pulled back in. And the dog was making the weirdest noises. It was like total panic. And anyway, we grabbed the dog. We both yanked on it, eventually pulled it out. The dog had a few thorns on it, and it was absolutely terrified. It was pooing itself, you know. Where we pulled the dog out, we left a hole in the thorn bush. So I've stuck my head in to have a look. As I did, this face appeared. Like, I could see the thorns, but I could see this face behind the thorns. And I thought, what the hell's that? And I'm sort of looking at it. And the face came up a bit closer to me. So it was roughly about 2 feet away from my face. It was that close. And I'm looking and I'm thinking, what the hell is this? And it looked like a female, half sort of apish, half human, half something else. It had this really sweet look on its face, like it was looking at me with a very placid look. I'm looking at her, and we're both staring at each other. And at this stage, she's still got this nice, placid look on her face. The reason I say it's her is because it didn't look like a male. It had like a girly face. I've turned my head back and I've yelled out to my mate Greg. I said, "Come have a look at this." And as I turned back in, its face completely changed. Now, I mean, it's gone from this nice, placid, like I said, half apish, half humanish something, to turn into something really evil. The whole face changed. It went from, like I said, this sweet round face to a really sort of elongated, really creepy-looking evil expression. It was kind of like mimicking me because I must have been frowning at it. But the thing is, it was cowering. Like I could see it, like it was going backwards. It was cowering like a dog would. If you hit your dog, it cowers. This thing was doing the same thing. It was cowering back, but it was still had this look like I wanted to rip my face off. I told Greg to come and have a look, but he wouldn't come. He was so upset about his dog getting covered in thorns and had ruined his whole day. And he just said, "No, come on, let's get out of here." We drove back to the house where this guy was, the owner, and I said to him, I said, "Oh, we didn't catch any rabbits." And he goes, "Oh, I didn't think you would." And I said, "Yeah, but," I said, "you got a funny looking creature on your property." And he's like, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, up near the thorn bushes, you got 2 thorn bushes up the back." So I just saw some big hairy creature jump from one thorn bush to the other. I was about to say I saw its face in the bush, and he's turned around and he said, "Okay, there's the front gate. That's the way you came in. Just go out that way." And he looked at both of us with a serious look on his face and goes, "Don't ever come back here again." And I was like, okay. The thing is, when I was telling him about what I saw the look on his face, like he knew what he had. When I said to him, started mentioning what I saw, the look on his face was like, uh-oh. And then he just went totally against everything, like just, "Nope, there's the front gate, get out, don't ever come back again." And I thought that was a bit weird, but yeah. My heart races when I talk about it.
I don't blame you. Those thorn bushes, how far away from you were they when you first saw this creature jump from one to the other?
When I saw the creature jump, I was probably 30, 35 metres. It was close. I'd say it was young. It didn't have an old look on its face. It had a young look. That's what I mean. When I looked at it, the first thing I thought of was, you look like a kid, you know? That's the first thing I thought of. This thing had a big body. What I saw was a big, heavy torso, kind of squarish, like side on it. It looked kind of squarish.
What colour was it?
It was a reddish, blackish, brownish colour.
Was it covered in the same amount of hair up and down, or could you see the skin through it?
No, when it did its dive, all I could see was just a big, massive hair, like a whole body covered in hair. Even the head. When I looked at it side on as it was jumping, I actually looked at its head because I'm still trying to work out in my head what it is I'm seeing, whether it's a pig or something else. But I looked at the head, cone shape, but it had a snout. It had like a short snout like you'd see on a boxer. You know how boxers have got that short, square snout? Yeah, this thing had something very similar to that.
It's not the first time we've heard that. We've got other interviews with people saying that they saw something that looked like it had a muzzle on it. Could you see any ears?
I didn't notice the ears, but when it changed its look, and it got really angry, it almost went doggish. You know, like its face went sort of a little bit elongated. The lines on its face got longer, like the frown lines. Its forehead looked like it had gotten a bit higher up or something like that. I don't know. It looked completely different when it got angry.
The expression changing, what happened on its face? Did it move its features?
It's hard to say because I turned my head away to get me mate to have a look at it. When I turned my head back to look in there, it actually changed its look. It didn't change its look when I was looking at it, but turned my head the other way, then turned back to look at it. It had gone from placid look to this really evil, angry, demonic-looking head. Did
the face get bigger? Because you said it more elongated. Do you think that was just a result of moving the muscles in the face?
I definitely think so. I think it has the ability to change its structure of its face. I think it's when it gets into a position where it's backed into a corner or angry, I think it does try to change its shape to make itself look more fierce.
So different to a human being, like when we're angry and we frown and we can change the expression on our face using our muscles. So you think it was a slightly different effect to...
When you chastise a dog or you corner a dog and you're going to hit it and it cowers down and sort of growls and shows its teeth a little bit, this thing had that same sort of look. Not as prominent as you would on a dog. Definitely had the ability to change its facial features. Now, whether that means it has some way of dislocating its jaw and making it look longer, or whether it just used the lines on its face to make it look more ferocious, I'm not sure. It was a very scary look that it had on its face. And I'm not one that gets scared easy.
Did you see the teeth in the first or second expression?
I saw its teeth. I didn't see canines. I didn't see any like sharp, razor-sharp teeth or anything. I saw teeth, but it wasn't showing a lot. It didn't open its mouth to me. It just sort of had a little growl, curled its lip up, was showing a bit of white, pearly whites, and that it didn't open its mouth.
What colour were they? Were they white?
Oh, I'd say so. I can't exactly recall what colour the teeth were, but I'd say they would have been close to white because it was noticeable. When I looked at it, we both looked at each other. It was almost like I could read its mind. The first impression I got when it looked at me with the placid look was, you caught me. That was the kind of look that it had on its face. And then when it changed its look, I could almost read its mind then. It was almost like, okay, you've had your look now, piss off. That was the kind of look it gave me.
When you first saw that face and then it moved a little bit closer, you said, didn't it? Do you think it was trying to have a better look at you?
Oh, for sure. She was just as curious as I was. We were both just looking at each other and both of us, our heads were moving. I don't know whether she was mimicking me or what. I kind of get the impression that it was copying me.
Did you see the eye colour?
They looked kind of humanish, but not really, more sort of animalish, if you know what I mean. One of those eyes that you'd look at and you go, wow, it's kind of humanish, human-like eyes, even though it's an animal,
Could you see the whites of the eyes?
I didn't really notice that much. I just sort of looked at the eyes and the eyes looking straight at me. While I was doing that, I was kind of looking at the rest of its face too.
Were they dark eyes?
I think it's kind of brownish because I did notice the eyes. The eyes were very noticeable.
Do you remember it blinking at all?
No, I don't recall it blinking. I remember it just staring at me.
What shape was the nose?
That was the weird part about it. The nose was sort of broad, similar to an ape. How apes' noses sort of they sink in more, and this wasn't. It was kind of like a bit more of a nose, like a proper nose, but a bit more flatter, a bit more spread out. But when it went into this angry look, somehow its nose changed. It didn't look the same. It looked, that's the word. Its nostrils flared, like really flared. The whole thing, when it changed its look, its ears changed, its face changed, everything changed on to make it look more vicious.
Right, what do you mean its ears changed? What did they do?
When it looked at me front on, like when it had the placid smile, I didn't notice the ears. All I was looking at was just this pale face. Didn't have any hair around the face itself. The hair was around, around the head. There might have been enough hair covering the ears when she looked front on. I'm looking at it. All I could see was the face front on. But when it changed its look, its ears sort of stuck out a bit more, but it looked like the ears were covered in hair as well, almost similar to a dog. That's the only thing that I noticed with this thing. At first impression, it was similar to apish human type of thing, but when it got angry, it started to look more like a dog.
What colour was the skin on the face?
Pale.
Pinky pale or a grey pale? Or
No, greyish sort of pale look.
was it smooth skin or leathery?
If you're going to compare it to something similar to a chimp, you know how they got that top lip always looks puffy and sort of smoothish, but the rest of the face looks a bit sort of scaly. Yeah, it's similar to that. To me, I think it was a young Yowie because it had young features, and the skin didn't look that rough.
What do you mean by that?
It didn't look old. The skin, the eyes, the whole face just looked like something you'd expect to be younger. The only thing I'm sort of a bit curious about is how the hell it got in the thorn bush. There was only a tiny little dugout behind the bush. Wouldn't have even been enough for me to climb in, and yet this thing got in there. Yeah.
Tell me about that leap that it made from one thorn bush to the other. Was it like a human-style leap?
If you had a dog and you got your dog to run up and then do a dive, it was similar to that, except what it did was when it dived, because I actually got the whole picture in my head of its whole body when it dived, and what it did was it put its arms out forward, slightly tucked in, right? It had its arms out similar to a swan dive, but its elbows were tucked in a little bit. The back legs, like I said, were shorter, but they were thick, really thick and stocky, and those legs were actually pulled in a bit. Like when a human does a swan dive, everything's straight. The legs are straight, the arms are straight. No, this thing pulled its legs in, its back legs in, and its front arms were bent on a slight angle, but it had both its hands pointed out like a swan dive, but its elbows were tucked in.
It didn't do a run-up or anything, it just jumped?
No, that's the weird thing about it. I looked at the thorn bush on the left, right, and like I said, it shook. My head was looking down, but my eyes were looking straight at that thorn bush. Like I would have seen it get a run-up, and nothing. I didn't see any run-up. This thing just out of nowhere just shot straight across from one bush to the other.
How big were those thorn bushes? So how tall and wide are we talking?
The thorn bushes were about, I'd have to say about 5'6", and they were probably about as wide as three burly guys. They were pretty big thorn bushes. They were quite big, thick. Height-wise, I said they were only about 5'6", but they were quite big and dense.
This creature was shorter than those bushes, or do you think it was crouching down?
I don't think it was that big. I mean, yes, it had a big torso, but I mean, I think it would have been close to 6 foot tall. Could have been shorter, could have been maybe 5'6" or something, or 5'8". I'm sort of guessing maybe closer to 6 foot because of the size of the torso. Like I said, the legs were short and thick, but the arms were a decent size.
Did you notice any smell?
No, didn't notice any smell. It was a bit of a windy day, but I think there was just so much going on at that particular stage with the dog having the thorns all over him and, me seeing that.
Did the creature make any noise?
Made no noise whatsoever. It was as quiet as a mouse. And it just kept looking at me. That's all it would do, just look at me.
And at that stage, it was kind of a curious or an uh-oh, look, you caught me, you said.
Yeah, yes.
Smiling or just the mouth straight?
It had this smirk on its face, a little bit like, oh, you caught me. That was the kind of look it had. It was really cute. And it had this cute look. And like I said, you could almost read its mind the way it was looking at you. But that all changed very, very abruptly.
Your mate called you.
Me and the creature were looking at each other, and then I turned to the right and I said to me mate Greg, I said, come and have a look at this. And when I said that, this creature must have got really pissed off that I'm bringing someone else over. As soon as I look back, it's totally changed its look. It just had this look like, like I betrayed it.
Didn't see the expression changed. It changed while you were looking away, and then you turn back and the face is completely different.
Yeah. Yeah, the whole personality changed. Originally, it was just this really sweet personality, and then it just totally changed. That's what spooked me the most, is the fact that it changed so abruptly. It wasn't a bit of a shock and then a bit of disappointment, then anger. It just went from good to evil. That's what really put the bug up me, because I just thought, my God, what if these things, if you run into one out in the bush, it gives you that placid look just to get you a bit closer. Suddenly just turns into something evil.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Also, there's one thing that I think people should know about these things is this one was probably, I'm guessing, maybe one of the smaller species. There's a few different species.
Yep.
I've actually spoke to a couple of Aboriginal elders about yowies a few years ago. And, yeah, there's a bit of conflicting reports from different guys. They've all got their own opinions. A couple of them actually said the same thing, that there are different species. There's small ones, middle height ones, and then there's the big ones. One of them actually made an interesting comment. He said that there's actually ones there that have a longer snout, looking more like a dog or a bear.
The Aboriginal fella you spoke to, where was his area?
Well, this was down here in northern New South Wales, because I was talking to him about it. Didn't really believe in it, and I was talking to the guys about it, and he told me about it. He said, go and have a talk to the other guy down in such and such. And, yeah, like I said, they were a little bit conflicting, but they both had the similar sort of answer, that there are the different species, and there are ones that have a similar look to a dog, but they're not really. They're basically a yowie with a snout.
We have an interview from Woy, if I remember correctly, of a man who was driving his car at night with his wife asleep in the passenger seat, and they had a creature that came up running alongside the car for quite some time on two legs, arms pumping like an athlete, but the face had what to him seemed like a muzzle, which led us to talk about whether it's a creature like in the US they talk about Dogman, whether we have something like Dogman. Is that the same thing, or is it something completely different? We're not sure yet.
I don't really go much on the Dogman theory. I think the whole Dogman thing, I think it's a little bit misunderstood. I think if we've got yowies over here that can have a protruding snout that looks similar to a dog, I'm guessing the American Bigfoot would have the same thing. And that's probably why people are saying, it's got a head like a dog, it's a Dogman. But
yeah, well, some people talk about it's got sticking up pointy ears like a Doberman. In fact, I remember Dean telling me about one particular case where they mentioned ears sticking up off the top of its head like a Doberman. What that is, I don't know.
I'd hate to run into one in the bush,
yeah.
Especially if it's got big, long, pointy ears like that, and it's about 9 foot tall.
And what happened to the poor dog? So was the dog okay?
Yeah. I actually ended up buying the dog off my mate. It was a good dog, but it's just, it wasn't very bright. Pretty sure that Yowie was what was grabbing him and pulling him back in. What
else could it have been?
Well, that's right. I mean, Borns can't pull you back in. I don't think they can anyway. What would the Yowie do if it had the dog? What was its intentions? Was it going to hurt it?
We've certainly had stories of terrible things happening to dogs. So I think that Doberman Jimmy, I think he won the lottery that day that you were there, because he might not have survived that encounter if you weren't there.
True. Another thing an Aboriginal guy was telling me too, he said the smaller ones live underground. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not, but it kind of makes sense a little bit when you think that this creature that I saw managed to get itself inside a thorn bush without getting tangled up in it. So that kind of makes me think maybe they do burrow underground in certain things, like that thorn bush would be a good spot to have a burrow in, because you know that nothing's going to go in there after you.
How do you feel when you're out bushwalking now? Are you on edge?
When I walk up to my usual spot, I'm a little bit edgy, but the other week, at certain times when I go up there, I have no fear at all. Other times I might go there if I hear a noise, that the whooping sound, that whoop, whoop.
Someone sent us something that he wasn't sure what it was, but we had it identified by Gary Opit, and Gary reckoned it's a type of pigeon that has quite a low, it sounds like a huge bird, but it's not that big, but it's wampo pigeon. It's sometimes mistaken for yowie calls, yeah.
When I used to live up in the hills, and we always used to get all sorts of weird noises up there, and one of them was that whoop whoop, and I used to hear it every morning, and I didn't know what the hell it was. And then one day I heard it, and I went out to my window and I looked down, and there was this dirty big bird with it was a brown bird with a long brown tail, and apparently they don't fly. They just hide in and out of lantana and all that sort of stuff. But getting back to the yowie and the thornbush, I still don't doubt that they do burrow similar to what rabbits do. They might have like a burrow somewhere. And when I used to do fencing, and I actually used to move houses as well years ago, and we used to go on properties and move the old timber homes, there was several occasions there where we came across wombat burrows. They're quite large. I was quite surprised how big the burrows are. You can crawl into one. Some of those burrows actually go in fairly deep, about 20-odd metres. It wouldn't surprise me if a yowie would kill the wombat and take over that burrow. Wouldn't surprise me one bit.
They could potentially enlarge it themselves.
A yowie could go in there, kill the wombat, dig that tunnel out a bit better and connect it maybe to somewhere else. It wouldn't surprise me at all if some of them, like this so-called smaller ones, if they are burrowing underground. Just by the way that thing was carrying on the day that I saw it, it kind of reminded me similar to what a rabbit would do, the way it was so wanting to be stealthy and hide and jumping over to the bush and then hiding in the bush. If it was a big yowie or something like that, I really doubt that it would want to hide in a bush. It would probably just run away. Been stewing over this for years and not worrying about it, but in the last 12 months, it has been eating away at me. I really wanted to get it off my chest. My mind has been expanded a lot more now since so many other people have come forward with yowie stories. It's made me feel a lot more comfortable.